Welcome everyone to this session, February session, sense-making session of Braille. My name is Victor Metacognitive. I'm an associate professor at the University of South Australia, and I will be your host for today. As you know, the focus of this session is to start the discussion on an important topic, and then after the presentation, there will be also additional activities during the month. Today we have a really great opportunity to listen fantastic speaker, Professor Benedict Boulay from the University of Sussex in UK. He's been involved in research in artificial intelligence for quite a long time. He's an emeritus professor at the School of Engineering and Informatics at the University of Sussex, and he's also visiting professor at UCL, University College London. He's been researching in the area of artificial intelligence in education for a long time. He's been the president of the International Society for Artificial Intelligence in Education. Currently, he's the treasurer and secretary of the society, as he's written numerous papers in the field. Also edited 9 books, and a very recent one with Professor Antonia Mitrovic and Kalina Yasser, a handbook for artificial intelligence in education, which was a massive project to pull out such a fantastic group of people and come with a very almost ultimate handbook in the area. In general, his research has been in metacognition and teaching people programming, novices how to learn programming, but also in the area of metacognition and developing meta-affective with students. So without further ado, Benedict, it's great to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vita. It's a great honor to be asked to do one of these webinars. I feel very flattered to be asked. AI in education at the moment is at an interesting point. There's a lot of optimism because of large language models and ChatGPT in particular, and endless papers are being written about how wonderful they're going to be in education. Not much evidence yet, but loads of expectations that things are going to be great. And at the same time, there are many people now interested in AI in education who don't know anything about its past. And this talk came out of a review that I was asked to do of a paper which claimed that intelligent tutoring systems were all very well, but they only ever focused on direct learning outcomes, and they had no interest at all in supporting and developing learners' metacognition and meta-affect. And I thought this was completely wrong, because there are lots of bits of work which have done exactly that. And it was just that this person was new to the field. So what am I going to do in this talk, which, as I say, was a response to a paper I was to review? It's really in 3 parts. I'm going to say a little bit about what I understand is self-regulated learning, and I'll offer a static view of it and a dynamic view of it. I will then take a kind of historical tour through the development of self-regulated learning systems from about 1997 to about 2022. I've divided these kinds of systems into interactive systems, reactive systems, and in my concluding remarks, I'll talk about proactive systems. So a static view. Well, this is a kind of an ontology of self-regulated learning. It's made up of cognitive and motivational and affective parts. On the cognitive, we have metacognition, which is about reflection on what we know and understand. We've got regulation, which is managing the process of learning through goal setting or planning, monitoring and reflecting. We've got motivational, which I haven't developed in this particular diagram. There are lots of links coming off it, but they're not on this diagram. But on the other side, we have the affective dimension of self-regulation. So in just the same way as we have metacognition, we have meta-affect, which divides into reflecting on the feelings that you're having as a learner and also the feelings that you have about your feelings. You may be pleased about a result, but unhappy because the result was not as good as you would like, or it was better than your friend's result. So a feeling about a feeling. And there's also affective regulation in terms of if you know that you tend to be nervous about something, you might take some steps to stop the nervousness before it gets too difficult. You may make plans about how you think you're going to feel at the end of the problem solving, for example, and you're probably going to monitor your feelings. So I think that the affective side mirrors the metacognitive side. I've coloured the purely affective bits in a kind of pinky orange colour to indicate that it's about feelings more than the rather cool blue of the metacognition. Now that's a very static view. One more point about self-regulated learning. There's another phrase that universities use called learning to learn. And I tend to regard that as an improvement in self-regulated learning. It's not the same as self-regulated learning. If you get better at self-regulated learning, you have learned how to learn. And that getting better might be because you are better at goal setting, maybe better at reflecting, maybe better at monitoring. Each of those different parts of self-regulated learning can be improved. And if you end up as a better self-regulated learner, you have learned how to learn. Moving to a dynamic view, Winnie and Hadwin, who have written huge amounts about self-regulation over the years, they have a process model. I'm not expecting you to be able to see all the details. It doesn't really matter. What they say is that self-regulated learning is cognitively and motivationally an active approach to learning. The learner is actually thinking about the process as he goes or as she goes. We posit learners engage in 4 weakly sequenced and recursive phases of cognitive and behavioral activity. So the diagram shows you what things influence what things and gives a sense that there are some cyclic activities going on, and that's at this stage that's all one needs to know. I'm going to annotate the diagram slightly here. So the weakly sequenced phases are the learner thinks about what is the task in its context. Why am I doing this task? What is the task? What constraints are there on the task? They formulate some goals and plans to try and achieve it. They commence trying to deal with the task and monitor how they're going. And at the end, they reflect and adapt on how it went for the next time. And this is all done within a context, and there's an internal and an external context. The external context is where did the task come from? Who set it? What's the consequences if I do it? What's the consequences if I don't do it? Does it look like a task I've seen before? All those sorts of things. And then there are internal aspects of context, which is why do I want to do this task, or why don't I want to do this task? What do I know about the areas of this task? What factors and what do I bring to the task? Am I feeling in a good mood today or not, or a poor mood? All those internal parts of the context. So you've got internal and external parts of the context. Now, this is labeled a cognitive system, but I think that hidden in there, though not explicitly stated, are in the dispositions and motivational factors and orientation include affective issues. And lots of people have talked about the way that affect and cognition interact with each other in many, many activities, including learning. And here's a quote, which I think points to an interesting idea. Self-regulated learning is dependent upon students being motivated to regulate. So you expect students, or you hope your students are motivated to learn the stuff that they're supposed to learn, but they've also got to be motivated to go one step further to regulate their cognition. If there's extra effort, extra attention, so it's therefore extra motivation in terms of regulating cognition strategies and effort to respond to feedback. And feedback is inherent to self-regulated learning processes, with external feedback providing essential information about potential discrepancies between current and desired performance. So there's that kind of focus on the fact that you can't just expect students to self-regulate unless they can see the reason to do it. If they don't want to learn maths, they're very unlikely to want to self-regulate during a maths lesson, because that's extra effort on something they don't want to do. So I've divided self-regulated support and develop systems into three kinds: interactive systems, reactive systems, and proactive systems. So interactive systems are not linked to any underlying learning system. So basically, you're just dealing with a system, but only at the SRL level, not at the domain level or whatever it is. Or they may have an underlying learning system, but it's designed to record, but not to intervene in real time within the learning activity. Learners get on with their learning, make choices amongst what they attend to and how they behave, and the system records and analyzes, and then enables later self-regulated learning reflection on the choices and outcomes that occurred. So some examples. So here's a really early one from my then student, now Professor Punterbecker. She built a system called MIST, Metacognition in Studying from Texts. And it was a system that had no learning system underneath it. You could come to this system in a geography lesson, a history lesson, a computer science lesson. It didn't matter. What this system was designed to do was to help you plan the reading that you thought you needed to do. So it would ask questions about, if you can see on the left there, what is the purpose of the reading? Is it to study thoroughly, to get all the details? Is it study to get the gist? Is it studied to find specific information, and so on? On the right of the screen, you've got some ways of reading: skimming, read a summary, read chapter in detail, and so on. So basically, the idea of the system was that you planned by clicking on the different boxes there about why you wanted to read something, how you were going to set about the reading, what was the method you were going to use, and how much time you thought you were going to take over that reading. And then you would go away from the system and you'd get on with the reading, and you'd come back, or it would send an alarm at the time you had said you needed, and then you would have a kind of post-mortem about how well your plan had worked out, and whether, if you were going to do this again, you thought that you would make different choices about your method. So effectively, it's a system that helps you plan and goal set about reading, and then reflect on your plans and your goal setting. She tried it out with some school students, and what she found was that the better off, the more capable students quite easily took to this idea of the planning and the reflecting and making a plan about the reading, but the lower ability students had a lot of difficulty. And this kind of result actually echoes through quite a lot of work where the more capable and potentially more intelligent students are already better at self-regulated learning than the lower ability students. And it's kind of a chicken and egg issue about the relationship between capability of self-regulated learning and what you have already learned to be able to do. A more recent system by Winnie and Hadwin, called N-Study, is a system to help students who are reading material, let's say off the internet, but certainly through a browser. And it enables them to organize and annotate their reading while they're doing it, to find links between parts, to say that this paragraph it refutes this other paragraph to say that this piece of text is a more detailed version of that bit of text. So they essentially build a superstructure on top of the flat text, which describes some of the relationships between the individual bits of text. And to some extent, that's a kind of metacognition, because what you're doing is you're trying to understand what the internal structures are of what it is that you know about this, whatever the reading is about. But it also had a facility where students could, through a chat system, could work together talking about the way that they had each annotated the text. So there was a group chat, and you could take on, as an individual in that chat, various regulatory roles. You could point out issues to another student. You could be a critic about the way that they'd done the annotation. So in a sense, you could learn how to regulate yourself, partly by critiquing another student, but also by hearing a critique from another student. And we'd call that co-regulation, where one person or system helps to regulate another, and in the hope that being regulated helps you learn how to self-regulate. And the system here, although it didn't intervene with students while they were working, it certainly provided patterns of learner behavior after the event. So you could trace back and see how the annotations developed and how they relate one person's annotations to another. So let me now contrast that with reactive systems. Reactive systems are much the more common in AI and ED. They are linked to an underlying learning system as opposed to the previous ones. They're designed to record and to intervene in real time. So they're providing often co-regulated learning by intervening and making a suggestion about how the student should behave. Learners get on with learning and make choices amongst what they attend to and how they behave, just as with the other systems. The system records and analyzes, just as with interactive systems, but it enables simultaneous and later reflection on choices and outcomes. So again, an early version from the Sussex lab, Luckin, now Professor Luckin, built a system with her student Louise Hamilton, which was designed for children to learn about ecology. On the right-hand side of the screen is a map of the topics that the child could work on, and the child had the choice of what topic that they could work on. And the topics could be addressed at a number of different difficulty levels. So the child could work on a hard topic at an easy level, or an easy topic at a hard level, and so on. And the metacognitive aspect of this system, the scaffolding, what occurred when the child was selecting what to learn about, or when they deciding what level of challenge to propose to themselves, when they needed help at the domain level, and during interaction as a reminder to keep track of their progress, because there was a progress button. And just to make the hint that is shown in the left part of the screen a bit bigger so you can read it, the system says, you've chosen activities at the lowest level of challenge, i.e. you've gone for the easy option here. Do you think you're choosing the right level of challenge? So it's not an order to go to try for harder things, it's kind of a suggestion. Another system from the early days, from Pittsburgh, the Cognitive Tutor for Geometry. As I'm sure you all know, the way it works is that there are rules about the effective solving of geometry problems. The system tracks what the student is doing using the rules that were pre-developed. And if the student deviates from the rules, the system intervenes in some way or other, and is able to provide immediate feedback, if that's a good thing, to ensure the student doesn't get too far off track. And what they did was that they thought, well, why don't we use the same technology to build a system to help the students use the help system effectively? So rather than, for some students, they might use the help system too often or too little or badly. So they built a help tutor, again using production rules, just like the basic tutor. But these were rules about the effective use of the help or hint system. And again, it would provide immediate feedback. And an example of a hint here was, no need to hurry so much. Take your time and read the hint carefully. Consider trying to solve without another hint. You should be able to. So again, it's a little suggestion, a nudge, if you like, about to try to stop the student. We can assume in this case that the student was rushing, that they were clicking on the hints but not taking enough time to take the hint in. So that is why the feedback was there. A different kind of a system for kids now, Curly and Susan Bull. It's called the CALM system. And this was a system which was helping kids to learn various issues to do with water and the water cycle, making rain and the rest of it. In the middle of the left-hand half of the screen, you can see topics. The first one is water and water cycle. The next one is separating solids and liquids, making water clear or pure, and so on. Those are the topics. And then on the left-hand side of that screen, you see the system's beliefs about the student's knowledge. So in terms of the water cycle, the system believes that the student has a high knowledge level. And in terms of separating solids from liquids, the system believes that the student has a good knowledge level. And then on the right of the left, or rather in the middle of the overall screen, the student's beliefs, because it asks the student, how well do you think you understand this topic? So there's a set of students' beliefs there. So when it comes to the water cycle, the student has got high confidence level. When it comes to separating solids and liquids, a moderate confidence level. If we look further down, we see a disparity between what the system thinks the student's knowledge is like and what the student thinks the student's knowledge is like. So the system thinks that the student has got high knowledge level about the evaporation of a solution. The student thinks they've only got a low confidence level. So the system intervenes, and I'm going to blow up the right-hand side of the screen because the text is a little small. And the system says, would you like to change your belief so you agree with me? The recommendation is high knowledge level, or see why I hold my views, have me explain, or view your and my beliefs about your knowledge, or answer some questions to show me how much you know. So Susan Bull calls this it's an open learner model with the possibility of negotiation. So the student had the choice of justifying why they think they know more or less to the system if they wanted to. So it's not just a system that says, I'm the system and I know what you know. It's a system that does say that, but it's willing to be changed if you can convince it that it's got it wrong about what you know and what you don't know. She tried that out with some kids too, 10 and 11-year-old children, and she compared children who had the inspectable model, which I've just shown you, versus those who had the inspectable model plus the negotiation possibility. And there was a kind of an interesting result. All the participants improved their self-assessment accuracy, but those that engaged in the negotiation improved faster. So that tells you something about the active interrogation of what you know and justifying it and thinking about it actually helps you become more accurate in faster at becoming more accurate in your self-assessment accuracy than simply being presented with a chart of your self-assessment accuracy. Perhaps the most famous tutor for focusing on self-regulated learning is Metatutor by Roger Azevedo and his colleagues who have developed it and run it on various experiments over a long period. Um, so the underlying system is a system for learning about blood circulation and how the heart works. So it's a fully fledged intelligent tutoring system that can help you learn that. But layered on top of it are uh, agents who monitor how you're going about your learning, and can intervene with suggestions at a metacognitive level about your learning. So there are 4 agents. They've been given names. I'm not quite sure whether there's anything special about those names. Gavin, who helps you navigate through the system. Pam, who helps you plan via goals and sub-goals. Mary, who monitors your progress. And Sam, who allows you to deploy different kinds of self-regulated strategies. So those agents are looking at what you're doing and intervene if they think that you are really not making the best job of learning from the system. Now, there are also learner-activated processes. Either learner, him or herself, can press a button to engage in specific self-regulated learning activities, like checking prior knowledge, checking judgments of learning, checking his or her feelings of knowing, checking the evaluation of the content, maintaining progress towards goals. So you've got this dual way of the system working. In a way, the top half, the agents are a co-regulating set of mechanisms because they intervene and suggest things. And in green there, the learner activated processes are pure self-regulated learning where the learner is intervening to try to make sure that he or she is on track. They've done a lot of different experiments. A recent one is this one where there was a graph made. The little dots are individual students. The vertical dimension is judgments of learning accuracy. And the horizontal dimension is the post-test score. And what you see from the ellipses is that there is a more or less linear relationship between the quality of the judgments of learning accuracy and the post-test scores. So to some extent, a little bit like the Susan Bull result, but with it, but this because they both have shown that people do better, but there's not a time issue here in terms of the amount of learning, but a similar kind of set of outcomes. Another system, pretty famous system that has got a strong self-regulated learning element to it is Betty's brain. I'm sure everybody knows about it, but I'll talk about it briefly. As the human student, you are presented with an empty whiteboard into which you are requested to try to build a model of an ecosystem. You've got some learning materials available to you as well, and you build essentially a naive physics diagram which expresses how the various processes in the ecosystem actually work. The narrative underneath the system, the educational narrative, is that what you're doing is you're helping Betty, that's the avatar down in the bottom left there, to learn the stuff. So that if when your diagram is tested and it doesn't do very well, it's sort of Betty who's failed the test rather than you. But the point of it is that building this map involves a whole load of metacognitive judgments. You are trying to read resources all about ecosystems, and you're trying to see how things work, what influences what, and to what extent, and in what direction. So you're putting your growing understanding down in front of you in terms of that map. And it also has a teacher in it, Mr. Davis, who provides feedback saying, your map is rubbish, do it again, or your map is brilliant, well done. But he also provides a little bit of metacognitive advice about your use of the resources. saying, well, look, you showed me a map. I told you it wasn't very good. I've just shown it to me again, and you've not changed anything. So I'm just going to have to say the same thing again. Please go and look at the resources about whatever the topic was that you didn't do very well. So there are two levels here of self-regulated, or there's self-regulated learning building the map and co-regulation from Mr. Davis in terms of metacognitive advice. I'm going to leave that one and move to the looking at the affective side of self-regulated learning, because there's much less work on that. So again, early days, one of my students built a system for teaching about data structures, not the most enthralling of subjects to teach, but he was interested in trying to get the students into the right state of mind to tackle doing problems in data structures. So what he did is he introduced some relaxation exercises and self-affirmation statements like, I can do this, I am good at this, I'm sure I can do this, I will do this, as part of the process. So all the students would do the relaxations. Sorry, he did an experiment comparing two groups of students. Those who did relaxation exercises at the start and again after each problem, versus another group of students who sat quietly while the first lot did their relaxation exercises. So everything else was the same in the system, apart from sitting quietly or doing relaxation exercises. And what he found was that there were a significant increased post-test difference between the students who had taken relaxation exercises after each problem compared to the ones who sat quietly. I do have to say that the relaxation exercises weren't specific to doing badly or well. They were done after each problem. So you could imagine a more intelligent system might change the relaxation exercises depending on the outcome of the problems. A more famous system than that one by a long chalk is maths, the experiment with Maths Spring by Yvonne Arroyo and her colleagues. It used to be called Wayang Outpost. This was a tutoring system for teaching kids maths. It was a complicated system, and she and her colleagues introduced the idea that they would react to the students, both in terms of what they did at a cognitive level, for example, increasing the problem difficulty or decreasing it, but also in terms of the kind of comment that they would make back at an affective or metacognitive level to the kids. So she divided the kids in terms of the number of errors they were making, the use of hints, and the time taken into a number of different groups. So there was the low, low in errors, low in the use of hints, low time taken. There was high in the errors, high in the use of hints, high time taken, and all the other variations on between low and high. And then for each of those patterns of low and high, there was a diagnosis. So for example, low was that this was a kid who had shown mastery but without much effort. So what the system would do would be to make the problems harder because they seem to be just going through them too easily. And the affective and metacognitive decision was to show their learning progress, a sort of praise to them about how well they were doing. The high in errors, high in the use of hints, high in time taken, was low mastery and high effort. So they would decrease the problem difficulty as a cognitive, but they would emphasize the importance of effort and perseverance. And their system is makes a lot of use of Carol Dweck's ideas about mindset and about how some children think that they can either do or not do things because of the way their genes work. And lots of kids feel, indeed lots of adults boast that they have no ability to do maths. Whereas Dweck's view is that you can learn to do most things. It's not a matter of simply that you've got the wrong kind of brain. So the various learning companions might pop up with comments like this. Do you know that when we learn something new, our brain actually changes? It forms new connections to help us solve similar problems in the future. Pretty amazing, huh? Learning math is like riding a bike. We have to practice a lot before getting good. So these are all kind of effective motivational comments back to the students that it's kind of okay to make mistakes, just need to work a bit harder and not lose heart. AutoTutor, I should have had a range of dates there too, because that's been going for a long time and they've had all kinds of different versions of the system teaching different aspects. But they have an affect-sensitive version, and that was affect-sensitive in two ways. There was a teacher avatar who could change her facial expression and indeed her body posture to indicate her reaction to your good or poor learning of how an operating system works. So unlike the other tutors I've shown you today, this was one where you had a conversation with the tutor about whatever the topic is. As I said, in this case, how an operating system works. So, she could approve, in which case she would look vaguely happy. She could be disappointed in your poor answer. She could be skeptical about some assertion you made, or she could show empathy if you really are making a whole hash of your answer. So that's one kind of effective response. But it had some subtle ways of dealing with your emotions. In the case of confusion, the tutor itself, she would acknowledge that the stuff was hard or confusing. Some of this material can be confusing. Just keep going, and I'm sure you will get it. So it isn't not saying it's down, it's just because of you. It's me, the tutor. And even more so in the second quote, I know I do not always convey things clearly, says the tutor very, very humbly and self-deprecatingly. I'm always happy to repeat myself if you need it. Try this one. So here was a system that was kind of taking the responsibility for the fact that something was confusing in order to help the student at an effective level. I'm now going to move towards some conclusions. So I've tried to talk about learning to learn, which is improving self-regulated learning, and given a very brief and rather speedy history over the last 25 years of this kind of work. And overall, there's been a kind of mixed rate of success, I think. And the problems are, I think there are four problems. One is for the learner having to divide their attention between cognition and affect in the first place and self-regulated learning. So partly looking at the domain, partly looking at the learning, and that's kind of difficult. And self-regulated learning needs its own specific time allocation. You can't hope it's just going to happen when it happens. You need to say, now is the time and we're going to take 10 minutes over this, 10 minutes for self-regulated learning. We've just done 20 minutes on problem solving and you did well, but now let's think about how much you've learned from that. And self-regulated learning needs its own extra motivation. I mean, a student could reasonably ask, what's in it for me if I spend time thinking about my learning? Will it make a difference in the future? And if so, what would the difference be? And then the other issue, of course, is transfer issues. If you've learned how to self-regulate in one domain and in one context, how easy is it to transfer not the learning of that domain, but the self-regulated learning strategies from that domain to some other domain? And clearly, the final point is that the affective component, much more is needed. I could find very few examples where there was a clear attempt to intervene at an effective level with the students. So I want to make a suggestion for future research, which is what I call self-regulated learning proactive systems. So they would be linked to more than one learning system and domain. And that's important because that would enable the learner to compare and contrast self-regulated learning skills and strategies across two or more systems and two or more domains. And it would also help with transfer skills. So you could see, in seeing how the skills needed in different domains are different, it will help you to do transfer to some third system. Just in the same way that if you've learned a language at school, it allows you to understand your own native language a little bit better and lays a framework for learning a third language. I think such systems like N-Study would enable peer interaction about SRL, talking to other students about their self-regulated learning and critiquing each other about it. And then the most important thing, I think, is that it would identify the self-regulated skills that are not just emerged through using the learning system. The reactive systems, they react to what the student's doing. And if there's no opportunity to practice a particular skill because of what the student has done, then that skill isn't going to get practiced. So they would go beyond simply reacting, and they would create learning situations that would make the unpracticed skills more relevant. And I have a nice quote from a maths educator, not in AI and education, which kind of captures the idea behind what I call these proactive self-regulated learning systems. And he's talking about how you should really teach maths in university. A curriculum in which affect is considered may include generating problems from the curiosity of students in order to develop their sense that intense feelings are appropriate, and teaching them to apply heuristics when these feelings occur. Anxiety, fear, and despair, but not puzzlement, bewilderment, and frustration, may be regarded essentially undesirable affective states. Yet we need to provide appropriate domain-specific ways for students to handle the negative affect when it inevitably occurs. And he goes on, we also need to provide productive experiences with and uses of desirable affect, including the affect of frustration. Students should occasionally experience frustration, not too much, of course, and then be brought back from it, guided to make progress in the problem with processes suggested by the frustration, and feel subsequent pleasure, elation, and satisfaction that is heightened by the earlier experience of frustration. We give students too little experience with intensely positive affective states, rarely connecting them with their own genuine mathematical achievements. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben, for the fantastic presentation. And now we can open the floor for questions. Everybody just raise your hand or write in the chat. We've seen there were some comments in the chat, but let's see. So just there should be a button to raise your hand down below. And if you can't do that, you can pose a question in Q&A, and I'll give you.
Vita, maybe you could read out the question. If there is.
So it was more of a comment about in the 80s in Canada, there was a system for both language learning, and where different learning strategies have been explored for second language learners, and basically examining how different students with different ability use different kinds of strategies.
Okay, it's talking about the good language learner studies in Canada. Um,
I have I can start off that was from Pete Smith. So I can ask I mean, you give us a really good overview of all of the different studies that have been existing over and I really personally enjoyed it because this is not my primary area of research. Uh, One thing that I noticed is that most of the systems were trying to directly engage with students. Hey, what about this? Do you want to do that? Do you want to do that? What do you think that this would be a good? What about the evaluation step? I haven't seen, at least from the things that you were showing, after, I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is also to change students, if you look at the Viennese model, internal conditions. So one of the conditions is, I'm not going to do this activity. I think it's stupid. I think it's a waste of time. Let's say highlight it. I don't think it's an effective learning strategy. That's just my view at the moment. So at the end of the student system might ask me, hey, do you want to do some highlighting, or do you want to do this or that? And let's say I do it. At the end of the study, hey, do you want to reflect now on, was this useful, wasn't this useful, to kind of change my condition for the future. And that's kind of the goal of all of the systems, to change us eventually when you're, studying on your own without these tools, without the meta tutor or whatever, that you still develop a specific learning strategy that will help you. I haven't seen much, at least from your talk, in that evaluation step influence. Rather, they were all within learning, in the loop.
no, that's a good point, but that's not because that step hasn't been taken. It's because of the way I gave my talk. So, for example, if Roger Azevedo was here talking about his own work, he has a nice example of using MetaTutor to teach note taking, and not just to take notes, but how to take effective notes, not, as it were, write down everything that you have heard from the teacher or everything you've seen on the screen, but to write notes which were brief and informative for your use later. And he used that system and found that he did make some good changes, that he influenced people who didn't make notes to make more notes, and he influenced some people who made poor notes to make better notes. So there really was, as it were, a self-regulated learning evaluation. And two or three of the systems that I talked about tonight looked at the issue of how did judgment of learning or accuracy, how did that develop? So that's also part of self-regulation. It's a different bit. It's more on the metacognition side than on the regulation side, but it is actually a self-regulated learning outcome. Perhaps with a different, if I were to give this talk again, in answer to your question, perhaps I should highlight, I take it as a good suggestion, actually. I wish I should highlight more clearly the self-regulation learning positive and potentially negative outcomes of the experiments. But yeah, well, thank you for that comment. So they are there. I just didn't always talk about them.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. And let me just go briefly to the Q&A now. Here you go. So maybe just see, can I give you a mic? Probably would be better if I give you a mic and you ask your question. Can
you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Thank you, Vito, and thank you for this amazing talk. It was very insightful, and I have two questions. One is more like a clarification. So when you explained that one of the features of SRL proactive system would be like enabling peer interaction about SRL, and I thought that could be actually done by current SRL reactive system, just like, capturing if learners are not really interacting with peers, then like, encourage them to interact with peers. So I would like to ask you to give further information about why do you think that's something SRL proactive system can do? And second question is, so I think SRL proactive system is like really insightful and like eye-opening idea, and I want to understand a little bit more. So it would be great if you can give like kind of hypothetical examples of system you're picturing. For example, if AI is creating a situation, would that be like just like ChatGPT creating like some scenario or case study so people can, like users or learners can like criticize them?
Okay, let me take your first question first. The idea of the importance of the peer learning has been shown, or indeed just talking, whether it's with a peer or whether it's with a teacher, in lots of studies, nothing to do with AI in education, that actually there's a special value in talking through with somebody else to convince them that you know or that they don't know. Justifying helps both people, that you learn about what you understand by trying to teach that to somebody else. You are surprised by some comments that they might make about what you thought you understood because they show that you didn't understand. And that two-way process of discussing with a peer is really effective in helping both parties understand something better. In terms of your second question and inventing a new situation, it could be a case study. If you thought that there are certain kinds of self-regulated learning behaviors that are appropriate in case studies that won't actually occur if you have been doing just problem solving of a very ordinary sort. So I worry that if you base all of your self-regulated learning on one kind of domain, that's likely to limit the number of different kinds of self-regulated learning behaviors that you need to practice. So my idea was that in a proactive system, it would identify which of the self-regulated learning strategies you hadn't practiced. There was not much evidence that you practiced them, and they would invent a situation either in a new domain or in the same domain in which it was more likely that you would need to use the strategy that hasn't yet been tried.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. So we have a couple of more questions, and one is very specific. I'm not sure how about the Khan Academy, Khan Amigo. Have you seen that system? And what do you think? Is it missing the mark on integrating self-regulated learning and metacognition?
I haven't seen it enough to know. Could the questioner tell me about what it provides in terms of metacognition and self-regulated learning?
This was an anonymous question. If you can raise your hand, whoever was asking that question, if you want, I can give you a mic. But there was another question, I think, and I wanted to ask something similar, honestly. What are you excited in this area now moving forward? You showed us all of this basically the historical overview. How are things changed now with basically AI becoming mainstream finally after 50 years of talking AI is coming? It came with a big bang. What do you see? Basically, what kind of impact it will have on these research?
People are claiming that the fact that you can have a backwards and forwards conversation with a large language model, if it's tuned correctly, might well allow you to use it as a peer and then get the same benefit that I was claiming to the last questioner, about the value of explaining something or having something explained, looking to see whether the person that you're talking to agrees with you, whether they pick holes in your argument, and so on. So there's quite a lot of people talking about how you can embed a large language model into a system precisely to try to enable it to act as a peer to have a conversation with. I haven't seen examples yet of it being able to nudge on, oh, by the way, I don't think you are monitoring your planning very clearly, because in a way to do that doesn't need a language model. It needs rather old-fashioned kind of modeling where it's looking at your behavior with the system to see what it is you might be doing. But in terms of having a conversation, it might well be helpful as a peer, but I haven't seen, what I've seen have tended to be proposals for this rather than evidenced outcomes for it. I'd be very pleased if somebody can point me to a paper which shows good evidence that it works this way.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's something that and I've been personally struggling as well. I mean, with the systems you describe are very manually built. That's one thing. They're very, very well handcrafted, and you know what the structure of the knowledge graph or whatever the structure are you talking about, and then you're trying to figure out the missing pieces, and there's specific evidence, specific activities, and all of that. We do have this powerful model, but kind of we don't, like, missing the rigor of the old-fashioned rule-based, if you want to call it, not really, but this handcrafted.
GoFi.
Yeah.
Good old-fashioned AI.
And that's really when are we able at the moment, or will we be able to use these data-driven, laissez-faire models to achieve the effectiveness of the old, what we want to call old handcrafted rule models?
Well, I mean, there are different. If we put aside large language models and we look at learning analytics, clearly learning analytics is doing all kinds of great stuff in terms of being able to, let's say, with multimodal data, looking at students doing problem solving, wandering around the room doing problem solving, finding patterns in their behavior which are indicative of self-regulated learning. So that kind of modeling based on large amounts of data, yes, that really does have lots of potential. What people are also talking about is somehow that ChatGPT is the answer to everything. And that it can do everything that AIED has been doing for the last 50 years. And that is just nonsense, because it can't really infer very much about the person that it's talking to other than what they've said. It doesn't build any model. So in a way it's quite limited. But big data and learning analytics is fine. It's just that I think large learning models have got some possibilities, but not as many as people claim.
Well, certainly. I'd like to maybe stop here. There's some definitely will be more opportunities to get in touch with Ben and continue with the discussion. And of course, the video will be recorded and being posted online. And you'll listen. Really been great to hear. It was wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you everyone for attending. We'll see you in the next time.
Thank you, Vita, and thank you everybody else as well.
Bye.